When I write my Warhammer videos, I often find myself leaning a lot into stereotypes. Space Marine players are a bit dull, Tau players are a bit sweaty, Emperor's Children players are quite charismatic and handsome, you know the usual. But the issue of stereotypes is that anecdotal experiences can spiral into a widespread image of a group of people. Now don't get me misconstrued here, I'm not saying this to try and make this scene a better place. I just think if we're going to be making fun of each other, we might as well have a little data behind it. But how do you actually track and measure the stereotypes within a fairly niche hobby? I could make a little survey for people to fill out, but not only would that be way too small a sample size, I think most people aren't even aware of the habits they convey when participating in a hobby. Ask any Yu-Gi-Oh player if they smell and they will actually unironically say no, it's crazy. But we don't need to rely on self-reported data, because I found a method to view the browsing habits of each Warhammer faction. It sounds crazy, but it's real. Using Reddit's API, you can select any subreddit and see what other subreddits its users frequent. It's not a perfect system, as smaller subreddits such as r/crew will have much swingier results, but I believe this is the most accurate dataset available to us. I'm going to go faction by faction like usual, but I want to show you some examples first to show you how this works. These examples come from Reddit user LifeCompletion9577, who was the person who first posted this information, so I guess when I said I discovered a method, that was a big fat lie. But I messaged this person for more information, which I believe makes me a journalist. Now looking at Eldar's browsing history, what stereotypes do you think we might find? I wrote down before looking at the data that Eldar players might be more into traditional fantasy like Lord of the Rings due to the elfiness, I guess. And I can imagine Eldar players enjoying strategy focused games like chess. The data says that Eldar players are 7 times more likely to visit r/fantasy than the average Reddit user, 12 times more likely to visit r/world building, 14 times more likely to visit r/Pathfinder RPG, and 22 times more likely to visit r/Magic the Gathering Circle Jerk. This is pretty much spot on what I and most people would have guessed, and this makes sense as r/Eldar is a ginormous subreddit. Now for the next faction, I'm going to read you the dataset before revealing the faction, and I want you to play along at home and guess what faction this is. This faction is 28 times more likely to visit r/verified feet and 31 times more likely than the average redditor to visit r/dirty Snapchat. Yuck. If you was able to assess that someone who jacks off defeat and grooms teenagers on Snapchat was likely a Slanesh worshipping Emperor's Children player, you would actually be wrong. This was Grey Knights. I think the funniest thing about this one is Grey Knights don't even have that small a subreddit. This dataset was almost 20,000 people strong. Before we go into the full list, I've got a couple of disclaimers. I don't think it's going to be too mind-blowing to you guys to discover that Grey Knight players are 301 times more likely to visit r/competitive Warhammer than the average person. I'm also going to drop a lot of the X times more likely in r/ just to speed up things verbally. Lastly and most importantly, I really want to keep this light-hearted and fun. Every faction has some really weird things coming up, and the way I view it, the more weird and quirky stuff that shows up for your army, the better. I cannot stress enough how unserious this video is. Like, let's be real, 99% of Grey Knight players are not feet-sniffing gooners. Realistically, this video is a much bigger criticism of Redditors than it is Warhammer players. Let's not harass anyone in the comments, and more importantly, let's not be mean to me. Let's get into this. I always like to start these lists with Imperial Knights, because no matter how much I love my Emperor's Children and my new shiny Admech army, Knights will always be my favorite deep down. But this is one of the most unbelievably skewed datasets I've seen. I'm going to get a bit anecdotal here for a second, but my experience with the Knights community, as the community that I've spoken to the most over my time in this hobby, is that Knight players tend to be a bit older, and they're normally far more hobby focused than competitive. And this makes a lot of sense to me, as Knights are a hobby in and of themselves. But this data is just all over the place. Like, at first, my personal experience seems to be pretty supported. 4 times for books, 5 times for British problems, Magic the Gathering, and 3D printing. That last one makes total sense. 7 times for Lord of the Rings meme and prequel memes. I think that's something that could resonate with an older audience. But then it just falls apart. 12 times for arse teen boys, 13 times for bisexual teens, 14 times for autism, and 15 times for Asperger's. These are super weird, and I really want to write this off as weird, faulty data. But then we have a 25 times more likely to visit r/Gundam, which just makes too much sense to me. But it's the top of this list that's so truly bizarre. At second place in most overlapping subreddits is r/Warhammer 40k at 141 times. which is somehow behind the #1 result, r/has-been hotel at 142 more times likely than the average Redditor. Hell of a Boss is also extremely high, sitting above r/Warhammer and r/Grimdank, which is the main Warhammer subreddit for memes. Has-been hotel and Hell of a Boss come up quite a few times in these datasets, albeit nowhere near this heavily, and I do have a guess as to why. The way this data is collected is by looking at the overlap in comment and post history among Reddit accounts, and Has-been hotel probably has one of the most vocal, outspoken fan bases of all time. Now, full disclosure, I liked Has-been hotel. I think it's one of the most overhated pieces of media ever. Like, the only reason I even watched it is I was curious after seeing countless extreme thumbnails calling it the worst show ever written. But I thought it was decent, a bit rapey at times, but the cast of characters is fun. And I thought that Hell of a Boss was an actively great show, but it's just baffling to me to see it come out in full force in Warhammer hobby spaces. If you're a Warhammer player who's watched Has-been hotel, let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely so curious as to how accurate this is. Here's some Shagrot lore for you. I signed a contract to deliver 5 Tabletop Stronghold ad reads in 5 weeks, all paid up front. That was 6 months ago. This is number 4. If you want the hottest tabletop wargaming carry case around and you don't want to make the pilgrimage to West Virginia where they're made, you need to get your ass over to tabletopstronghold.com right now. Magcase 2.0 is both carry case and stylish display solution. With adjustable magnetic trays, you can carry just about any 2,000 point army you can think of. And with the 105 magnets that this case comes with, you can impress your friends by pretending to know what neodymium means. Use code GROT25 for 25% off and enjoy free shipping to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, most of Europe, the US of A, and the U of K. Thank you very much to Tabletop Stronghold for sponsoring this video, and sorry I am so useless. For Space Marines, we actually get to go chapter by chapter, as each has its own subreddit, so I'm going to speed through these for brevity's sake. Ultramarines has one of the largest subreddits in this video, and as such they're pretty standard results, the top 5 all being Warhammer related. But their 6th biggest overlap is a 67 times higher chance to be visiting r/planted tank, which is a hobbyist subreddit for aquariums. There's actually a couple of aquarium related subs here, and I have zero explanation as to how this can happen. There's also a 21 times higher likelihood of Ultramarine players visiting the gay spider brothel, but this subreddit is banned and I cannot figure out what this subreddit was, so just enjoy the mental image, I guess. Blood Angels don't have too much going on either, but they do have the exact same chance of visiting either r/goth sluts or r/men's rights, which is a real dichotomy. I wonder which one of those is supposed to be the Black Rage. If I was to ask you what the nerdiest Space Marine chapter is, I would have doubt you would have answered Imperial Fists, but my brothers in yellow have a real affinity for Batman, Berserk, Transformers, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and of course Has-been Hotel. Salamanders are also fairly standard, but they are the first dataset visiting r/unemployed, which is probably a result of all the Horus Heresy stuff they just got. Space Wolf players don't actually seem to be furries at all, and they have by far one of the least horny results here, so well done Space Wolf players. They are, however, getting fantastic value from their Disney Plus subscription, as they're frequenting the Mandalorian, WandaVision, and late-stage capitalism subreddits. Shockingly, Mongolians aren't showing up in spades to play a parody of themselves, but surprisingly, Australians are, with 45 times for Australia and 99 times for Sydney. Dark Angels have a weird data set. There's normally like 30 to 50 results for these, but there's only 7 here and they're hyper skewed. I believe this is because most Dark Angel players probably clicked on the wrong Dark Angels, and once you click on the wrong Dark Angel subreddit, it's very hard to leave. Now allow me to Peter Griffin explains this joke, because I feel bad for everyone I pranked last time I mentioned this. r/Dark Angels 40k is the place to go to discuss the First Legion. The far larger and often misclicked r/Dark Angels is a place to go and beat off the black women. Imperial Guard are exactly what you think they'd be. A ton of map games here and alternate history mods where Nazis win. Airsoft, history porn, tactical gear. Imperial Guard players also seem to be fairly refined gentlemen in fact, being 4 times likely to visit r/smoking, 5 times more likely for r/cigars, and 6 times more likely for r/polyamory. They're also 3 times more likely to visit that Guna boat game from a couple videos back. Custodes dataset just makes so much sense that it's even more fun to point out the funny ones. This is an army where half of the roster is stuck in resin jail, and as such we see r/3D printing and r/Ender free, which is one of the most common 3D printers on the market. We also see the first mentions of r/bodybuilding, running, and fitness, which I can totally see, that makes sense, right? Which is why I can say with full confidence that Custode players love fat ass white girls. Admech has perhaps the easiest conclusion to come to. Admech players are gamers. Once you get past all the 40k specific subs, it's just all games. Total War, Overwatch, World of Tanks, The Last of Us, Gwent's, Deep Rock Galactica, Star Citizen, it's endless. Sisters of Battle players are probably target to more stereotypes than any other faction. Sisters players are trans or weebs or uninterested girlfriends. And I'm glad I can put all of these baseless stereotypes to rest and inform you that Sisters of Battle players are actually pro-life cokeheads who really love white girls. And they're also almost certainly from Belgium. May every Belgian homie watching this video get his snow bunny. The Imperial Agents subreddit is so dead you can't even collect data from it, but we can get data for Deathwatch, which is kind of the same thing if you ask Games Workshop. Let me just remind you that these smaller factions are much more affected by vocal outliers, as I inform you that Deathwatch players are Republican cuckolds who send death threats to people for not enjoying the Expanse. Chaos Space Marines next, and once again we can go chapter by chapter. Iron Warriors have literally zero weirdness to them, but unbelievably, Iron Warriors have like one of the biggest subreddits in this video, far larger than all of the other Chaos Space Marine chapters with books, bigger than Eldar and Ultramarines, and only a tiny bit behind Orcs. That's insane, right? I've never even seen an Iron Warrior army out in the wild. I guess maybe it's spiked due to the recent releases, but Imperial Knights just got a brand new Knight chassis for the first time in a decade, and the Knights subreddit has half the active users as Iron Warriors. This is so bizarre. Instead of asking if World Eater players are angry, you should ask them why they're angry, as they are 18 times more likely to be visiting r/depression. Just make sure you ask them in Norwegian and assume they're carrying a knife. Next we have Emperor's Children. In ascending order we have Gone Wild, Sex, Breeding Material, Massive Cock, which is a fantastic time to inform you that almost every single faction in this video is about 5 to 10 times more likely to visit r/bisexual. Slut, boobs, adorable porn, which I couldn't bring myself to check out, but I'm going to go glass half full mode here and assume that this is just pictures of nice cute women and not the jowbait shit Reddit was founded on. Goth sluts, pretty alt girls, and finally r/horny. This is absolutely insane, but to be expected, right? Wrong. I lied to you. This wasn't Emperor's Children. This was Night Lords. My only possible guess for this is that the Night Lords community was irreversibly damaged by the gender-bent Primarchs that did the rounds not long ago. Naturally, you're probably thinking if Night Lords are this ungodly horny, then Emperor's Children must be reaching Lovecraftian levels of unfathomable horniness. Nope, not at all. Emperor's Children players are all about being hardcore atheists who get their thrills from left-wing politics, especially Joe Biden. Literally zero sex stuff here, like possibly the least horny fanbase out there. They are spot on with the stimulants, however. Like this entire player base is just pounding subscription meth. Me included, guys, by the way, we didn't. I'm sorry if the chaos section's been a bit upsetting to you guys. Emperor's Children aren't horny, and World Eaters players are depressed instead of angry. At least Thousand Sun players are smart, right? It breaks my heart to tell you guys this, but Thousand Sun players are going to Reddit in search of clever comebacks and showing off their Funko Pops. Knowing that the main Chaos Legions are being played by the complete opposites of what you expect is almost devastating. Our only hope now is that Death Guard players are actually fat, repugnant pus lords. Oh, thank God. As a full-time Warhammer 40k YouTuber, my job is practically just deleting transphobic comments from my comment sections in Discord. So I'm very well versed in what people consider the trans army. Trans army is a stupid notion in and of itself. People say Tau or Sisters or Tyranids are the trans army, but trans people, just like all people, are far too complex and varied to strip all individualism away from them and pin them to a single faction. That said, the answer is Chaos Knights. 255 times more likely than the average person to visit r/ask transgender. That's twice the likelihood of them visiting r/Warhammer 40k. You could perhaps interpret this as Chaos Knights being the army for trans allies who have a load of well-meaning questions for trans people. Actually, I like that way more, that's a great fit. I believe r/Tyranids is the biggest faction subreddit, meaning theoretically it has the most accurate dataset, which is really upsetting, because Tyranids do not appear to be for the girls nor the gays, nor the trans nor the insect enjoyers. Tyranids seem to be for the racists. Their biggest non-hobby overlap is a subreddit called Too Middle Eastern For You. It's hard to pin down what exactly the subreddit was, as it's now deleted, but surviving screenshots are very racist. Add to that r/Republican and r/Conservative, and we have a very weird result. I'm not saying all conservatives are racist, I just don't trust them near my brown friends. Drakari are perhaps the most American faction, at least to my British understanding of America. Law enforcement, American football, guns, guitar, North Carolina, men's genitals, ask gay bros, and late stage capitalism, the full Monty. I was really excited to get to Tau, as Tau players are so used to getting disrespected that you can say whatever you want about them and they don't get upset in the comments. Though unfortunately, Tau's results are super plain. They're really into Gundam and Gunpla, how shocking. There are hundreds of results for Tau, like you need to scroll a lot before you get to anything weird. They are twice as likely to visit Dirty R for R, which is a place for Redditors to try and meet up and have actual real-life intercourse. Genestealer cults might have my favorite data set of the lot. Genestealer cult players go to a bunch of different subreddits revolving around men's poor understanding of women, including a 51 times for men drawing women and 8 times for bad women's anatomy. But when they're done mocking how men treat women, they like to go and unwind to some r/breeding material. Just insane. And finally, orc players, who are 11 times more likely than the average Redditor to visit r/gay. This was an interesting yet totally substanceless look at what the stereotypical member of each faction is interested in. There are a couple missing factions here like Votan and Harlequins, but they just didn't have a big enough data set to do anything with. I'd like to quickly close out this video by apologizing for my extremely sparse uploads in the last 5 months, but I'm now medicated and functioning like never before. This is the second video I've made this week, and it's Wednesday. I have never been this elated before. Thank you all very much for watching. Cheers.